welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we will continue our team preview series with the NFC East. And first up is the Dallas Cowboys. So make sure if you haven't already, please go check out the rest of our team preview edition. Just try and make these as evergreen as possible. Get in, get out, smarten everyone up. So without further ado, your 2020 Fantasy Football Dallas Cowboys team preview. Starts up with Dak Prescott. And I think the whole Carson Wentz versus Dak Prescott thing has actually underrated both guys when you kind of talk about the general football fans' thoughts on them. And it's unfortunate because I think both Wentz and Dak are just awesome quarterbacks. And that's really all we've seen from Dak since he entered the league. I mean, just among 44 quarterbacks with 16-plus starts since 2016, guys 11th in completion rate. 13th QB rating, 11th in yards per attempt, 12th in adjusted yards per attempt. And I know that's just, upper kind of quartile. It's not like the guy's a top 5 quarterback, but when you consider the rushing upside he gives you too, league position high, 21 scores since he entered the league in 2016, we got a true dual threat talent here. And, yes, the Cowboys have consistently had one of the league's best offensive lines with Dak back there, but man, you make a 2-minute cut off of some of these plays that Dak has created over the years in off-script situations, and the dude is just a problem to get to the ground. It's no wonder Mississippi State could lean on him as heavily as they did, in the rushing game. The guy's never missed an NFL game. I know he was banged up towards the end of last season with that shoulder, but even then, making plays, doing the damn thing. The guy's been the QB6, QB10, QB10, and QB2 over the last 4 seasons. This Cowboys offense last year was one of just 11 offenses to average at least 6.5 yards per play since 1970. It's incredibly unfortunate they couldn't make the playoffs. One score game, a lot of kind of regression variables like that are pointing them having a nice little bounce back season, but just hard to really put too much of that on Dak. I think, going into 2020, we're going to see the best version yet. Please, Dallas, sign the guy to a long-term deal. I'm not sure why it's taking this long. I'm not sure why it is taking this long, but cannot think of anything Dak really could have done better over the last 4 years, to warrant long-term contract, long-term deal from the Dallas Cowboys. Moving on, running backs. So one of the things that is so awesome with Zeke being with the Cowboys, if you go back to his days at Ohio State, the guy was one of the most savage lead blockers you would ever see. And they've actually used him a lot with that in the running game when they do decide to run Dak on those draws, on those sweeps. Obviously we talk about blocking as a, just usually in fantasy land, not at all, but even in real life, it's always just kind of a side note about a player. But, I think the Athletics' Dane Brugler said it best about Zeke when he was coming out of the draft. He is the perfect Carmelian back that can fit into any scheme, any system, and do everything at a high level. I understand the Saquon Barkley's of the world are better runners. Maybe you take Derrick Henry if you want someone just to give the ball to 25 times per game up the middle. You want your Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara to throw the ball to. But, if you had to look at all 5, 6 of those systems with the running backs, I think, the average finish, if we ran 100 simulations for each time, of the Ezekiel Elliott-led offenses would probably end up being the highest of the group. So, all the credit in the world to Zeke for keeping up the production. He's been the PPR RB2 in 2016, the RB11 in only 10 games in 2017. In these last 2 seasons, the RB5 and RB3. He's a virtual lock for 300 rush attempts, He's going to be turning 25 soon, but still, very young. And yeah, he's still, pretty much the centerpiece and focal point of this offense. Has a chance to really get his receiving levels back up too. 2018, he caught 77 passes when Jason Witten was retired. And when Witten came back, he did soak up a whole lot of those underneath opportunities. So not only will, having Zeke in the underneath areas of the field to kind of take those checkdowns and those last second passes from Dak, I think help Zeke's fantasy production, but that's just going to help the Cowboys offense in general. Who wants Witten, having to encounter the linebackers and safeties in space? Obviously, you want your best players having the ball. Ezekiel Elliott is one of those guys, no doubt about it. Now the question is, can he hold off Tony Pollard for the entire season? And the answer is yes, because look at that contract that Zeke got. But that doesn't take anything away from Tony Pollard. Led the NFL in PFF's elusive rating last year. Pollard is objectively a stud. The guy just makes everyone miss, man. 26 broken tackles and just 101 touches. I don't know what they're feeding those guys in Memphis. Between Antonio Gibson, Darrell Henderson, Tony Pollard, the guys are pretty much breaking the PFF system. in some of these yards after contact, broken tackle statistics. So, the run game, it's been amazing the last few years. They lost Travis Frederick at center, but, they get Joe Looney back, who started for them all year in 2018. They've made some investments to the center position in the last 2 drafts. I think they're going to be just fine. Do not expect Ezekiel Elliott standing as a top 5, even top 3 fantasy back to go anywhere anytime soon. Moving on to the wide receivers. New group, CeeDee Lamb. I know all Cowboys fans were hyped when they made that selection. Just now an embarrassment of riches, but they made his strength stronger, and you got to respect him for that. But it still all starts at the top. Mr. $100 million man, Amari Cooper. And yeah, tough end of the season, but I think a lot of people just kind of forget what Cooper had to go through. Now I get it. $100 million, like, you need to win every matchup you're in if you're making, 9 figures in any sport. But Cooper has been one of the more sensitive guys to tough cornerback matchups over the years, and we saw that rear its ugly head in the second half of last year. He went 3 catches, 38 yards, no scores when shadowed by Darius Slay. Got goose-egged by Stephon Gilmore. Went for 8 catches, 85 yards against Tre'Davious White. A lot of that was in the slot, kind of escaping him. Wasn't shadowed against the Bears, and then had 1 catch for 19 yards against Jalen Ramsey, who he's going to have to see again in week 1. So, I think we overrate shadow matchups in general in fantasy football, just because really only Slay, Gilmore, and Ramsey, unconveniently for Cooper, he had all these guys, but those are really the only 3 corners in the league that consistently travel sideline to sideline and into the slot. So even when you're facing, someone like Tre'Davious White, true baller, you can still kind of rely on your receivers to spend, 40, even 50% of their snaps, of their routes elsewhere. But in Cooper's case, we've seen enough of this. And we've seen Dak willing enough to look at his other options that I would say, he deserves a decent downgrade ahead of these tough shadow matchups. In general, though, we're still looking at, one of the top 5 route runners in the league. Again, just got paid, didn't seem fully healthy down the stretch. I'm not firing up Cooper as a top 10 fantasy receiver this year, but, I think any doubts as to whether or not he can still, produce at a very high level are a little bit uncalled for. Because look, this offense last year was enabling 3 fantasy relevant wide receivers during the second half. After their week 8 bye last season, Michael Gallup was the PPR wide receiver 8. Cooper was the wide receiver 21. Even Randall Cobb was the wide receiver 27. That is more than good. And when you consider the upgrade that CeeDee Lamb is in all likelihood going to bring over Cobb, again, this offense just looks better than they were even more last year, which was already incredible. So I'm not quite buying the idea that Gallup is going to, overtake Cooper as the number 1 option, even though their targets were right there last year, and, Gallup did outproduce him at the end. But it's tough to assume that, again, with the money, and I think with natural talent, maybe CeeDee Lamb is the guy in a couple years, but I think right now we're just going to see him, operate mainly in the slot, but they're going to move the guys around. I'm hoping that's going to be the one big change with Mike McCarthy there. And we already started to see a little bit of Kellen Moore, but going back to Dez Bryant days, and the general complaint from the Jason Garrett offense was always how predictable it could be, and just small things like more pre-snap motion, moving wide receivers on the formation. These are things that are a staple, like in the Chiefs offense, for example, and the Cowboys could very easily do that themselves. So all 3 receivers, fantasy relevant enough. It's scary in these offenses. We look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from last year, and, the red flag that was O.J. Howard, Evans, and Godwin being these highly ranked fantasy guys. But this is almost as good as any offense in the league. We should expect multiple fantasy standouts from the Dallas Cowboys in 2020. Finally, on the tight end position, we have Blake Jarwin, finished 3rd on the Cowboys in yards per route run last season. If you just look at Dak's receivers in his career, who he's thrown at least 50 targets to, he's only averaged more adjusted yards per attempt when throwing the ball at Bryce Butler or Amari Cooper. Blake Jarwin's number 3. This guy is a legit seam stretcher. He scores a touchdown seemingly every single time he faces the New York Giants for whatever reason. And it's going to be good for him because although, again, this is a crowded offense with, capable playmakers all over the field, Cowboys had the 2nd most available targets from last season, only behind the Atlanta Falcons. Both Cobb and Witten had 83 targets last year, and, those are going to be distributed now to some arguably better playmakers. So, not expecting Jarwin to be the offense's top 3 pass game target or anything like that, but as far as number 4, number 5 pass game options in the league go, Jarwin carries a higher ceiling than most, definitely a prime late-round tight end, and really someone that I think you should be looking to get in best ball formats in particular. Whenever I'm doing these best balls this year at the tight end position, if I can get Kittle, if I can get Kelsey, if I can get Andrews, I'm happy. I'm taking one more tight end at the end, and that's it. But if I don't, I'm going to let other people take the tight end 4 through tight end 10, and then I'm going to get guys like Jarwin, Chris Herndon, Jonnu Smith, Give me 3 of those athletic studs in the back half of the draft, and then let the chips fall where they might. But I think by doing that, you're giving yourself a great chance, one by 1 week. I don't know that any of those guys are going to necessarily put everything together for 16 games. Maybe my guy Chris Herndon, but, Jarlin, Herndon, Jonnu. If you can get 3 of those tight ends if you miss out early, I think that's the best way to go in these best ball formats. And, if you're playing best ball, you better be doing it with Underdog. Use code PFF to enter their $1 million competition. And, hey, if you end up firing up a squad with Jarwin, Herndon, Jonnu, something like that, and you get that $1 million, just remember who sent you there. So that's code PFF Underdog Fantasy. Now on to the specific ranks. We're going to hear a lot of high numbers, guys. The Cowboys are loaded. QB, I got Dak Prescott as the QB3, 1 spot behind Mahomes, 1 spot ahead of Kyler. He was a QB2 last year. I mean, this isn't a hot take. And, with him really now putting up the passing volume, he's always had the rushing upside. And we could expect even the red zone rushing scores to get back up to 6 like they were the first 3 years of his career. All in on Dak Prescott in 2020. Underrated MVP candidate, truly. Running back, I have Ezekiel Elliott, RB3. 1 spot behind Saquon Barkley, 1 spot ahead of Alvin Kamara. I've had people ask me if they, maybe get Kamara or even Clyde Edwards-Helaire ahead of Zeke. And no, it's just, McCaffrey and Barkley have that, 300 rush upside. McCaffrey, not so much, but his targets are just so insane and out of this world that it makes up for it. Zeke has that, and the targets, while usually they were a problem, again, with Jason Witten not being there, he has severe splits, target-wise with and without Witten. We really could see Zeke, flirt with 100 targets this year. Easy RB3. Tony Pollard, all-time stud. I have him as my RB38, 1 spot behind Alexander Madison, 1 spot ahead of Chase Edmonds. And it's just a disaster strikes. These handcuffs, throw Latavius Murray in there too. If disaster strikes, these handcuffs are going to ball out. And I understand the argument in the fantasy circles that says, hey, if you draft Ezekiel Elliott, draft Latavius Murray, not Tony Pollard, because there's no scenario where Zeke and Pollard are going to ball out. But in a best case scenario, you could have Zeke and Murray. I get it, but look, there's only, again, 4 of these main handcuffs in the league. I'm fine to chase all 4 of them, regardless of who your starting running back might already be. Wide receiver, I have Amari Cooper, wide receiver 17, 1 spot behind Terry McLaurin, 1 spot ahead of Mike Evans. I have Michael Gallup as my wide receiver 33, 1 spot behind Hollywood Brown, 1 spot ahead of Marvin Jones. And look at these guys. I understand they finished, higher in the second half of last season, but there's just only so many targets to go around this offense at some point. And, the wide receivers could be the situation that, doesn't suffer. I mean, again, they're putting up big numbers here, but, I'm not going to anoint these guys as a top 10 option like your Zeke, like your Dak. And then CeeDee Lamb, I have wide receiver 49, 1 spot ahead of Curtis Samuel, 1 spot behind Henry Ruggs. Right now, he's probably the rookie wide receiver 2 that I'm looking to get. And I mean, that's only going to be better in dynasty circles. So tight end, Blake Jarwin, tight end 13, 1 spot behind Jared Cook, 1 spot ahead of Chris Herndon. Honestly, I would move Herndon ahead of Jarwin just after all this training camp move. But even then, I would take Jarwin over Hawkinson because we're looking at 2 guys that are projected number 4 options in their offenses. I think the Cowboys offense, nothing against the Lions and what Stafford did last year, but I would put the Cowboys 2020 floor well ahead of the Lions, which takes us to our win total. They are giving the Cowboys, always, a strong public team, 9.5 wins. This is wild. The defense is not looking good. They did not replace Byron Jones. Their defensive line lost Gerald McCoy. They tried to add a bunch of edge rushers. So far, they're not suspended. It seems like every year they start with a couple of these DN suspendeds. Aldon Smith is getting rave reviews. Randy Gregory wants to come back and play. Who knows? I think they're going to need Van Der Esch and Jalen Smith to get back to 2018 levels. Not saying Leighton wasn't there when he was healthy last season, but when they had those fast linebackers flying around, it just made the rest of the defense so much better. The offense is so good. I just feel like this win total should be closer to 9, and it's 9.5 because they are the Cowboys. At 9.5, I would take the under, I think. Would not bet a ton of money on it. I just think the Eagles, and I'll get to this more, but sorry, Cowboys fans, I think the Eagles are a little bit more complete team, a little better team entering 2020. And, I just think it's more so because this win total, again, should be at 9, even 8.5. I think the 9.5 line is more because they're America's team. They're going to get the action, and I just think that line is off by a tad. And as you can see, and yeah, so with that said, the over juice is minus 155 for 9.5, and the under is plus 125. So I think with that value in the juice, I would take the under. Make no mistake about it, this offense particularly is loaded. They're going to put up points, but just not entirely convinced, bringing in Mike McCarthy and, these things are going to lead to a huge turnaround. So that was your Dallas Cowboys 2020 Fantasy Football Team Preview. I'm Ian Hartitz. This is the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in, and until next time.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel, and if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.